Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Today's episode is a conversation I had with Laura Wilson, who manages skills-based micro-credential development for cooperative extension. I promise that will make more sense by the end of our conversation. I've known Laura for many years, and it was a lot of fun to hear about her science path, as well as the different roles she's had. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Today's episode is brought to you by Epstein Properties, providing real estate development and management services. It is also brought to you by Epstein Commercial Real Estate, committed to Maine, connected to the world. Laura, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm delighted that I get to have someone who I consider a longtime colleague, even though I feel like I've been on a parallel track and we rarely cross paths working, but we seem to always be in the same places. It has been a lot of fun to catch up with you and find out different things that you're doing. And I know your first passion has been water, and now you've got something slightly different. But first, I'm going to make you talk about water and what it is about science that made you fall in love with water and what you can do with that.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Maine. It's water everywhere, right? We have the best quality lakes. We have all of this coastline. What better thing than as a kid who has a place on a gravel road to go out with their father and dig ditches and make sure that the water gets off the road and out of the road. And, just water's always fascinated me. But I didn't start with water. It was kind of a pathway to get there. I started in engineering thinking, I'm not sure whether I want to go architecture or engineering, but when neither of those really panned out, I found an actual reprogram in water. And about that same time, I had noticed going to a camp in Maine on a lake, I had noticed changes in the water. I had noticed more vegetation growth. I had noticed more algae growth. Just as a teenager, it had changed over my lifetime. So that was kind of what drove me into looking at a water program as a college adventure.
I'm intrigued by the engineering / architecture. So it doesn't surprise me from the perspective of, I've told many people I can make anything science or engineering, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that was a typical thing that people would fall on when you and I grew up.
No, I grew up with a family full of engineers. My father went to Maine on the GI Bill. His actual degree was geology, but he ended up doing engineering with the phone company for pretty much the rest of his life. I have 5 older siblings, and 4 of them are engineers. And so graduating from high school, the question wasn't, are you going to go to college? What are you going to study? It was, what kind of engineering are you going to study? And so I did a year of civil engineering, and it wasn't quite right. And I was always into looking at structures and form and function, bridges and buildings. And I tried architecture for a couple years and went to Boston Architectural Center, and it wasn't quite right. The path is not straight. I didn't even know that there was an environmental science degree program until I started looking around, and it was like, you can get a college degree in environmental science, and I had no clue. And then I looked deeper. I was like, I can actually have a degree called water resources management. Of course, my father instantly was like, what are you going to do with that? Will you ever be able to find a job? Because his life was engineering. But yeah, water resources management. What an interesting college experience I got to have, because it was a little bit of physics, and it was a little bit of biology, and a little bit of zoology. And because all of those things come together in water, and it was really exciting to be able to study a little bit of all these different sciences.
So you said you noticed even, as a teenager growing up in the lake, changes in the lake. Were you able to kind of, as an undergrad, when you finally found water resources, to go, oh, that's what's going on? Oh, that's what's going on? Was it like that exact direct connection?
It really was. I ended up going to a university where they actually had stream ecology programs and groundwater programs. And I took some limnology, study of lakes courses, and got to talk to the professors and my advisors. After trying out civil engineering and architecture, I was so off cycle for getting any sort of a degree at all that I found myself like 3 credits short And so my advisor gave me a new portable instrument to measure fluorescence in water. Fluorescence being sort of a signature of how much algae is in the water. And he said, hey, take this for a summer back to your lake and see if you can come up with a paper just for him as an independent study. So yeah, my professors were like, yeah, you know what's happening? It's this eutrophication. The lake, there's more sediment coming in. And so the plants are opportunistic and you'll probably see more algae. It's a natural process sped up by humans. And it really formed the basis of what I did next for my work with cooperative extension. Got me right into lake science and lake protection.
So you, much to the surprise maybe of your dad, did find a job right away. And so if you don't mind stepping me through, like I mentioned earlier, I know that you've got a little bit different job now, but that is relatively new. So why don't you explain what on earth you can do with a water management degree with regards to lake and protection?
So if you stop to think about it, we have these water bodies, they're down at the bottom of a hill, right? The lake is sort of in a bowl around it. And that land that's around it, what happens in that land directly influences the water quality in the water below. You have a massive spill on the hill somewhere on a road, and whatever that spill is gets down into the water, it's going to affect the water quality. Well, I got this fantastic job. I had not heard of cooperative extension before, but was able to get this fantastic job working with the people who live around lakes, who love lakes, to prevent things maybe not as dramatic as that spill happening, but the little things that happen every day on the land that can get pollutants transported from the land, from the watershed, down into the lake. And the number one pollutant is just dirt. We're talking soil. And so for a lot of years, I was able to do education programs and work with people around the state of Maine to help them figure out how to manage their landscapes, whether they were just on that lakefront, which is your last chance to remove the pollution before it gets in the lake, or even in communities that were higher up on the hill, further away in the watershed, to divert their runoff, which contains that soil, and get it into the ground so that the soil gets trapped and doesn't go down into the lake. So fantastic job. My father did live to see that I had this wonderful job and was having a great time. And he was one of my volunteers with Extension for a while.
Can you explain what cooperative extension is, since it was a revelation to you? And I have a feeling not everybody who listens to this podcast knows what a cooperative extension is. That would be great.
Absolutely. So cooperative extension is part of the University of Maine, and we conduct outreach. We were formed back when, 105 or so years ago, as part of this whole land grant mission that some of our public universities have. And the mission of these land grant universities, where in every state, is not only the education of the people of the state and the research that is done, but also getting that research out to the public. So cooperative extension was formed over 100 years ago in Maine to get the research that's happening at our campuses out to the people of the state who can use it. Started with our agricultural programs and processes. We do a lot of ag research at these universities, but the farmers have to know what those new techniques are that are going to help them grow better crops. So we're the outreach portion of that land grant university system. And we have in the state of Maine 16 local offices in every county. You can go to your county extension office and ask us a whole lot of different things, and we will come up with research-based answers.
So you moved on from water professional to when I first met you, which was 4-H and STEM. Number one, why the switch? Number two, what was that about?
So why the switch? Well, my position with cooperative extension in the water outreach world was, like a lot of positions, funded by grants. So I had fantastic grant support, but I had 12 years of grants, that's so long. If you know the world of how grants work and how these federal grants come into colleges and universities, we're usually talking 2, 3, 5 years. I had 12 years from a USDA National Water Program grant. The whole program folded on the national level at that point. And so there really wasn't a lot of funding support to keep me employed full time in the water research and water outreach world. But about the same time that I was scrambling for funding, there was a position opening that was actually physically at the University of Maine. It was in the 4-H program, which is the youth development program of cooperative extension. So again, 4-H is part of cooperative extension, research-based youth development practices. So cooperative extension is based in research. And it was a new position. My charge was, hey, kids in 4-H, they're not as well connected to the university as we think they could be or should be. We really want to focus on the science and engineering that's going on at the university and make some connections for kids around the state, whether they're in 4-H or not, but have them see the really awesome research that's happening at the University of Maine. And it's like, why not? I've been 12 years doing one thing. The path is not straight. It had funding. So I took this new position and started meeting a whole new set of scientists and researchers and educators and people like you, Kate. You were just coming in with this crazy idea to have a science festival in Bangor. Who would have think of that? And just trying to make sure that we were all connected to each other, because there are so many people who want our kids in the state to know what they can do, to know that there is a degree program that might match their interests. Maybe it is civil engineering, or maybe it is architecture, or maybe it is environmental science. But kids need to know that there are these types of opportunities. And there are jobs that you can actually have a great time doing, and you can just work with and meet the best people. So I did that for the next 12 years or so.
So I'm struck, the two themes in those two jobs, from what I can hear, is the translation of research that's happening to the public. And that type of communication is not trivial. That is really hard to do. So do you have projects or examples of things that were either A, super cool that you got to really explain to people? I mean, I can think of a couple that I might feed at you if you can't come up with any, but also things that you just could not quite translate well, and through no fault of anybody, right? Like, just there are some things that have to stay in their field, right? Like, I'm not going to go be a heart surgeon.
Right. Couple things come to mind. So making no assumptions of our mutual ages, although we do have children about the same age. When I was in high school, the environmental communication that was coming out was, if you tell people the right thing to do, they're going to change their behavior, and they're going to act, even if it's against their self-interest, they're going to act to protect the environment. Man, were we wrong? That doesn't work, right? First of all, who wants to be told that they're doing something wrong? I'm just living my life. So that was a big eye-opener. I was fortunate enough to work on several projects with some communities in the state of Maine and across the Northeast. This is in the water world, where we were developing messaging in partnership with an environmental psychologist. And we were looking at what type of messages would get people to change their behavior, because behavior change is hard. So how could we make it easier on people, or more attractive for people to do the thing that polluted less? And we had a several-year campaign in the Bangor area around lawn chemicals. To have a lawn in Maine, sometimes some soil needs some amendments. Sometimes you need to add some nutrients to the lawn to grow turf. But when you buy a bag of random fertilizer at the store, sometimes the percentages of those different nutrients aren't what your lawn needs. And I was talking a little earlier about soil getting into water and that being the primary cause of water pollution. Well, that's because that soil carries the nutrient phosphorus, which is the middle number on a fertilizer bag. And if you have an overabundance of phosphorus, it'll grow green stuff on the land, but it'll also grow green stuff in the form of algae in the water. So we wanted people to put the right amount of fertilizer on their land if they even needed it. So we did a little research. We had a grad student who was great. He did this study in some different communities to find out what messages actually resonated with people and came up with, of all things, most people in this area didn't put anything on their lawns. You probably don't need to either, because you want to be in a similar state. Your lawn should be about the similar greenness or healthiness as your neighbor. So you don't need as much of that. But if you're going to use it, here are some tools to figure out how much you should use on your lawn so that you're saving money and not applying too much. I think I answered part one of your question.
I find it super interesting that, and not surprising, that the angle is, why would you waste your money, right?
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. I mean, yes, it has an impact, but I was chuckling at the idea of, well, if we just tell people the right thing, then of course it's so easy, right? Both a lack of understanding when we were that age of the people who were teaching us, that's just not how the world works, but also the idealism of youth is also a large part of it.
Oh, huge part of it. So it was the money part, but it was keeping up with your neighborhood norms too. So social norms. Somebody's not going to let their entire lawn go to dandelions and clover if everybody else has the manicured green lawn. But there are ways to have a nice looking landscape and be protective of the water.
So it's interesting. I realize we're going a little bit off tangent here, but as a side note, that's why I find this No Mow May really interesting. Yeah. That has really picked up speed in the last couple of years because it's fostered a conversation about, wait, why do we have these lawns again? Like, what is it that we're doing and what is it that we're trying to have with it? And I've actually heard a couple people kind of had this revelation about, oh, wait, lawns were born of what era? Like, it's a very strange concept if you take a step back and think about where did this come from and the manpower and how it was all done.
I've been really enjoying seeing those other types of messages that come out, like No Mow May. I wish I'd thought of that, right? Yeah. That's such a simple thing to do. It's easy. It's not going to keep somebody from using their lawn to play frisbee or have the kids out running around on it. It's not going to affect somebody's time. It's actually going to take them less time. You don't have to mow. So I really like those thoughtful messages that come out that can stick.
Okay, I know that was part one of the question. If you want to go to part two, you can dive right in.
I have worked with a lot of different scientists and engineers when I've transitioned to this position in 4-H. And what's fantastic is I find that these faculty and staff members are always really excited to share their research with kids. And we've made programs that have allowed us to get kids and faculty and grad students into the same space. 4-H is a learn by doing organization. We believe that experiencing is going to be a better thing than telling a kid to read a book and, answer the questions out of the back of it. We do use a research-based model, the 4-H Thriving model, to focus in on how we engage with kids. And yeah, I have done some programs with kids and faculty on some topics that really are not straightforward. Trying to get some research topics narrowed down enough for a middle schooler to really understand, it's hard to do. So what we do is we pick parts of the broader topic area and really focus in on what is familiar or recognizable to the audience. One project we've been working on in 4-H the past few years is developing some activities for kids based on the idea of environmental DNA. So if you're a fourth grader, not only have you potentially never heard of DNA, you don't know what it really is, but now we're supposed to translate this concept of DNA that is in the environment, maybe in the water, maybe in the soil, that indicates that an organism was there at some point in time. So we really didn't dive that deep. We focused more on historical fisheries in the state of Maine, different ways that we know that an organism was in a place, looking for clues, science as a detective story, rather than jumping right into that higher level concept of taking a water sample and seeing the DNA that's in it and seeing how that matches up to some barcoding of some DNA that had already been sampled and categorized. We don't have that much time with kids usually directly. And, what is the big picture? The big picture is, oh my goodness, they're doing this really cool detective work. And it's telling us what organisms used to be here in this stream or in this river. And, oh, they have students doing some of this work, and I could do that too. And I think focusing on that bigger picture rather than all of the translation can get us past some of those really big concepts.
It's a really good reminder that sometimes if we go too far in the details, we just lose people. And I think it's actually a really good reminder, maybe for faculty or researchers, to think about how do they explain their stuff in the big picture. And in some audiences, that's actually the most important thing you can do. Everybody wants to get in the details of their own stuff, but that only works if everybody has the same language. So that is a really great example of how to make things as accessible as possible without what someone might call dumbing down. You're not dumbing it down. You're just changing the focus and broadening the scope. It's really neat.
And that's where the exciting parts of these jobs have been, because it's what the research scientist feels is really important may not be what's really important to the person coming in the door who wants to know how it's going to affect their property values in 10 years, or what the historical significance of this plant is, or it's all audience driven. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned over the years is, it's not about me. It's not about what I think is important. It's what the audience that we're trying to work with or that is calling us for input, what do they find important?
Well, that is a good segue into what you're doing now. So relatively new position, a little bit of a switcheroo again. Let's hear it.
Sort of, kind of. So I had absolutely fantastic experiences bringing kids onto campus, working with faculty and staff to get out to where the kids are, developing programs. Then we had this little period of time where we really couldn't get together all that much. We weren't gathering in spaces, and it was a little rough to do some of the work that we had historically done. But about the same time as all of that pandemic stuff, which is fascinating from a science communication point of view, by the way, even before that, there was a professor on the University of Maine campus, Dr. Claire Sullivan, who was looking into this novel idea of awarding some recognition that showed skills that people have. Primarily at that time, we were looking at university students. And university students were doing so much more than showed up on a transcript. You have a transcript, it shows what classes you took, it shows what grades you have. Fantastic, but it doesn't show some of the things that a student can do. So this started with me and with Cooperative Extension, with some of our students that we would train to go out and do science activities with kids in the community. I wanted them recognized for their ability to go out and facilitate activities, to manage a classroom-sized group of elementary students, and to facilitate these different science-based activities with kids. So I helped develop micro-credential. So it's machine readable. You hear digital badge. You hear micro-credential. The university has very specific vocabulary around these concepts, but we designed these artifacts of learning and skill development first for university students that showed what they had done outside or even within the classroom that doesn't show up on a transcript. It's an interesting proposition because there are so many things that cooperative extension does. So I have been able to take that paradigm of offering a credential or offering that artifact of learning and skill development and apply it to a lot of the different types of programs that cooperative extension offers. So you might be interested in horticulture and getting a job in the horticulture industry. Extension offers a horticulture apprenticeship program. It's extension. It's not for credit. It's a training program. It's a skill development program. Prior to this credentialing effort, you get a certificate, probably printed out on paper. And if you're like me, you lose it within the next couple months. But now, for more and more of our programs, you can earn a credential, which is a website. You have a unique site on the internet that shows an image of a badge. And it not only has everything you did to earn this credential, it also states who verified it, who is standing behind your learning and skills. In the horticulture apprenticeship program, cooperative extension is saying, okay, this person, because every page is unique to the learner and is linked to your email address, this person did these activities, they were assessed, and they have these specific skills. So now we have this building movement of being able to offer learners credentials that verify, validate their learning that are backed through the University of Maine system. And I'm working primarily in the area of cooperative extension to partner with other entities because, when we can partner to offer the same credential, if 2 or 3 places are having the same type of training, let's get together, assessments and training and verification, but also being able to offer these learning validation nuggets to both adult learners and to high school age learners.
I've known about Claire's work for a while. I've been really fascinated by the badging or whatever you want to call it. I think it's a super valuable way to recognize that learning doesn't just happen in a degree program in school. So the part that seems to me the hardest part to figure out, and this is my question, are employers or other people looking for it? And do they know what to look for? And what does it mean to them?
So we're on the edge of this. We have had conversations with industry, and we need to balance out building credentials that verify the skills that different industries need and want with matching those back to our programs. So far, we've been kind of opportunistic, but I think that that is the next place that micro-credentialing in Maine needs to go, so that we will have the businesses and industries, and there are people working on that end as well, and so that the university and the colleges will know what those skills are that are needed and valued in the workforce and make sure that people have them. The ornamental horticulture program, the horticulture apprenticeship program, they actually worked with industry to design the program. And part of completing that whole micro-credential learning experience is to do an apprenticeship with the industry. We're working on some credentials in aquaculture that will align to the Maine Aquaculture Association's learning competency standards. So when we're developing credentials, we do need to think about who is going to want to see those and who the employer is.
I would also, to play maybe a little bit of devil's advocate, argue that the employers have to realize that this is a different approach and it's not the same as what you get necessarily in a 15-semester course. And there's real value in them thinking about, okay, what are the skills that I am interested in? And can it be done in this way that may or may not be enhanced by Ben doing a degree program, right? Like, I don't think this should all be on universities or cooperative extension to figure out personally. I think that has to be a newfound way of identifying some of the skills that you learn that just don't fit in school, but then also allow for true lifelong learning so that I think it's fair to say that neither one of us are doing what we thought we would do when we started school, right? And
not even close. Yeah.
Right. And if there were micro-credentials that we could have gotten along the way, the path wouldn't be any straighter, but it might make more sense if you could look at those and be like, oh, I see how that happened. Because right now it just is like, whoa, what happened for some of this stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. And I think it's really neat that you, it seems to me, immediately saw how cooperative extension programs can align with this. And it makes a lot of sense to me that you have an expertise in that. So how do you make those worlds collide in all the good ways?
I don't think I could have seen the connections if I had not done the water work and then the 4-H connecting position and really understood the depth and the breadth, because there are both of the offerings that are out there, university system down to University of Maine, down to cooperative extension. There's a brilliant woman working at Advanced Structures and Composites Center who is developing these credentials for students based on some of the instrumentation and tools and techniques that they're using in that cutting edge research lab. So students are coming through, they're getting a degree, but then they also have badges in these very specific new instruments that they could only get there at that particular lab. On the flip side, we also have these programs where we're introducing teenagers to aquaculture, and they're setting up aquaponics units and they're doing water quality testing. Well, they're also getting a credential from the University of Maine system for the knowledge that they've gained by setting up these tank systems. Will they go on to a university? Maybe, maybe not. But they know that they have that skill. And one of the really interesting things that I learned early on was that by providing the learners with this documentation of their skills, it allowed them to articulate the skills that they had learned during the program. Because look, these are the skills right here that you have now. We have verified them. Now they can talk about them. So if they go to an interview, they can actually list the skills that they developed and how they were assessed.
I love win-win situations. I really do.
It's an interesting world. I think there are a whole lot of other people doing credentialing. A lot of universities, I think University of Maine system, thanks to Claire Sullivan, is really still on that leading edge. So you're not hearing about it everywhere yet. But your question about engaging employers and knowing what employers want, that's part of the development of the credential. There's a whole quality assurance system that goes into place when you're developing one of these credentials that is going to be offered through the University of Maine system process. And knowing who your audience is and, starting to understand the landscape of employment in a certain industry and what skills somebody coming out of whatever training program needs to have to be successful in that industry, that's part of it. So we're not just throwing a badge on things. We're actually doing some of that work to make sure that there's a market and a need for that credential to happen.
Yeah, I remember years ago hearing someone describe it as badges that scouts used to get. And those mean something, right? Like people who are in that world know, like, ooh, I know what that took. And it's hard to build something from the ground up with that. But, oh, that's really cool. Really neat.
I've only been in this position a couple months. I've been sort of dabbling in it a few years. But like you said before, the win-win, right? For the people in the state, for the people who are creating these learning experiences, they're putting a lot of work into making sure that our learners through extension have research-based information and have skills So why shouldn't they be getting some sort of a verified credential that shows that they have those skills?
Well, you may have only been in this position for a couple of months, but it's pretty clear to me that you got a handle on it and that you're actually really psyched about it.
It's new and exciting, and it's absolutely nothing that when I started on those however many different college adventures so many years ago, trying out those different college majors, this was not anywhere near close to on my radar.
See, it's another good example of not all of us have it figured out from the beginning.
The path is not straight either.
Laura, this has been just really fun. I always love talking to you, but it was really nice to hear more of your background and how you've ended up doing what you're doing. It's really neat stuff. And I, for one, am really appreciative of what you do to help education in Maine. And it's a different way of educating than most people think of when they hear that. I like to think of it as a critical part of a stool. One of the three legs of the stool is this kind of outside the classroom education that helps connect the dots with inside the classroom and then application. So thank you.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Kate. It's always fun. And yeah, we do have a good time too. When we're doing these win-wins, that's when it's fun.
It's nice to be part of something that's not a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice. And please leave a rating and review. It will help more people find us and help spread the word about some of the remarkable people doing science in Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Kate Dickerson, and edited and produced by Scott Loiselle. The Discover Maine theme was composed and performed by Nick Parker.